The text for this morning for our gospel is taken from the book of Matthew, the 10th chapter, verses 24 through 39. A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, and the slave like the master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs on your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be member of one's own household. Whoever loves mother or father more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. The Gospel of the Lord.
When I read the gospel lesson for today, I went into a brief panic. How or what should one do with a gospel lesson like this morning? In that panic, I sent Pastor Kayla a quick text and asked her, what is the good news in the gospel text this Sunday? I had to smile at her response because she came back at me and said, the good news is that I'm on leave and I don't have to preach on this one. And to think, I had even asked her to do pulpit supply and she didn't take me up on it. But in all fairness, Pastor Kayla did give me some ideas later in the communication that helped. But don't blame her for my message. So here we are today with a gospel that seems to go off the deep end. It seems to force the pastor into giving a fire and brimstone sermon that has little to do with grace and a fair amount to do with the expectations of Christ and what it means to follow him. Or I could probably twist and turn it a little and make it into grace. But could this paradox we live in be part of the problem? An ELCA pastor named Sharon Riesinger Blizzard asked an important question. Do we spend too much time trying to make Christianity palatable for the masses? Expending effort on crafting worship experiences and trying just a little too hard to make it cool at the expense of making it real. She goes on to say, easy is not always the answer. In fact, most things, she said, truly worth having require expenditures of time, effort, and energy. So this morning, why should we expect a life of faith to be any different? In the gospel lesson, we are given guidelines that are nearly impossible. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. The gospel lesson cuts to the heart of the matter. Following Christ is hard work. It is a difficult task at best. If Jesus' life and ministry and the paths of his early followers are models, I would say most of us are in real trouble. When we switch to our Romans text, we find the message where it's going in the opposite direction. We are told clearly we are saved by faith and grace and not our works. In the gospel, we have impossible demands or expectations, and now in Romans, we have faith and grace, saved by faith and grace alone. So let's mix these texts up a bit. Some say we have a battle going on here. Faith alone versus works, compassionate love versus judgment, grace versus impossible guidelines. Now, I worked for over 30 years in the social and human service field. The battles I mentioned are a mirror to the questions we face daily. In my work, we were constantly faced with the decision to judge or show compassion and understanding, to lay out expectations that were seemingly impossible to follow or understand, and figure out how to help or be a barrier. Thinking back, if I plugged into my judging mode, I did not have to work nearly as hard. I could just blame the client. If I plugged into the mode of showing compassion, understanding, and love, I had to work. I had to swallow some of that need to judge. I had to understand the person's situation. I had essentially to deny myself and enter that person's world. In the gospel lesson, Jesus is saying just that. Deny yourself and enter my world. It is worth, but don't assume or pretend it will be easy. It is work. It is faith in action. It is God's grace extended rather than judgment extended inappropriately or randomly, versus our refusal to enter one's world. This is true in our church community. In the teaching of Jesus, he never tells us that you are called to judge. In fact, when the Pharisees got into their judging mode, most often Jesus turned around and gave them a little hell. He tells us again and again, we are called to love, serve, and extend God's grace. In fact, if we go on to verse 40, we hear, whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one that sent me. He went on and said, whoever gives me even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. It even gets better later in Matthew when Jesus tells us the poor will have good news brought to them. We are a divided world today. We see the world in right and wrong terms only. We quickly judge and show compassion. We judge quickly and show compassion hesitantly at the very best. In fact, compassion is oftentimes portrayed as something negative or something that we should not quite embrace. We as a church community divide ourselves righteous or unrighteous, all based in our judgment. We understand situations that are in front of us today as right or wrong, all based in our judgment. We divide ourselves into deserving and undeserving, all based in our judgment. We decide what is acceptable or not acceptable, all based in our judgment. In our churches, we fight and argue destructively over the littlest of things, all based in our judgment. Look at the issues dividing us today. Does anyone here truly know what it is like to live as an African American man in our world today? Do we truly know what Black Lives Matter is about? I know I do not. Do we understand what it feels like to have a history of slavery and lynching and racism? We do not. Do we understand what it means when I say we live with white privilege most of our lives? We do not. But we do have a choice. Do we understand all of this via God's grace and love? Or do we understand it via our judgment? Remember what I said earlier. It is easy to judge, as it requires less work on our part. Extending God's grace and love requires work. It requires us to put God's love into action. It requires us to enter their world. It requires us to turn our lives over to Christ and be his hands in a world divided. In the Romans reading today, we are saved by grace and not our works. At the same time, grace and faith are verbs. They require action. They require things that are not easy. They require compassion and love. They require us to not enter into God's job description and think we have a right and an obligation to judge our neighbor and other human beings. Being saved by grace and faith alone is not a license to live without expectations, but to the contrary, it requires us to be God's hands and God's heart in all that we do. Thanks be to God. Amen.